All right, now we're ready to start row 4. And row 4 is actually the beginning of where this pattern just alternates. So this is an increase row, and this is an increase row that's just like the row we did before. It's called what I call a 2 increase row. So what we're going to do is we finished row 3, that marks our stitch. We're going to do 1 single crochet in the top of each of the single crochets until we get to the next to the last stitch of that pattern. So for this one, that was 4 single crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the last 2 of this pattern, we're going to do 2 single crochets, I'm going to pull that one out because I lost it. But here's the second single crochet. And then in the last of that segment, we're going to do 2 single crochets. Now I find it easier because this is an alternating pattern. It's a row with 2 increases in each section, and then the next one will be a single increase. I'm going to mark this row differently. So to show that it's a 2 increase row, I'm going to mark the last 2 stitches. So if you look here, I'm going to put the marker in starting under 1 stitch, those top 2, and I'm going to bring it back out on the last one. So the marker is going to look like this. It's in 2 stitches, and that's the last 2 stitches of the row. I'm sorry, of the segment. So that's the first repeating pattern on the 4th row. So we're going to do the same thing in each of these. So we're going to do 1 single crochet in each stitch until we get to the next to the last stitch of that segment. And in that next to the last stitch, we do an increase or 2 single crochets in the same spot, and in the last stitch we do 2 single crochets. And again, since this was a 2 increase row, I'm going to take my marker and move it up. I'm going to put it in going through the next to the last stitch, and I'm going to bring it back out going through the last stitch. So the marker is through 2. The last one in this is exactly the same. Since we haven't gotten to the end of the row, we're just repeating. So we're going to do single crochets till we get to the next to last stitch. And we're going to do 2 in the next to the last stitch. And then we're going to do 2 in the very last stitch. So this was row 4. And it's what I call a 2 increase row, meaning each segment had 2 single crochets into each of the last 2 stitches of each segment. Now we're going to go on to row 5, and row 5 is the second row that we repeat, and this would be a 1 increase row. So to do that, we're going to put a single crochet in each stitch until we get to the very last stitch of the segment. So in this, we know that it's a single crochet at increase at the very end because the row before had 2 because of the way we marked it. So this is the next to the last stitch. We only put 1 in it. And this is the last stitch, and that's where we do our increase, and we're going to put 2 in it. And then so I'll remember that this was a single increase row. Instead of putting the marker through 2, I'm just going to put the marker in through 1. So it's at the very top. And that's a single increase row. So we're going to do the same thing in this next segment. we're going to single crochet in each stitch, just one, single crochet in each stitch until we get to the very last stitch of that segment. So now I've done this one, but there's one stitch left in the segment. This is the last one. We're going to put 2 single crochets in that same spot. Sometimes your marker gets in the way, and if it does, like that one is, since I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to pull it out so that I can get those 2 single crochets in. And then I know I need to mark the last stitch of that segment, and it was a 1 increase, so we're just going to put it through the very last stitch. I'll kind of open it up so that it's easier to get in. So that very last stitch, those top 2. Now we have one more segment, and this will finish the 5th row. So it's exactly the same as we've done. It's 1 single crochet until we get to the very last stitch of this segment. And we know this is the last segment because we've got a different color marker to denote the end. So here's the next to last stitch. It only has 1 in it. And this is the last stitch. And again, I've split the yarn with the marker, so I'm going to take it out so that it doesn't get in my way. And in this last stitch of the row, or round, I'm going to put 2 single crochet and put my marker back in. And we've now completed round 5. You can tell that we're beginning to get that kind of triangular shape because of where the increases are. And so now we're going to start round 6. We know that round 6 is going to be a 2 increase row. We've marked this through just 1 each time, so we know that this was a 1 increase row that we just did. So the next one's going to be a 2 increase row. We don't have to count the stitches. We just know that we're going to do single crochets in the top of each stitch until we get to the next to the last stitch in that segment. So all I'm doing is doing a single crochet in each stitch. I'm paying attention to where my marker is, and I'm now at the next to the last stitch. The marker's in the last stitch. This is the next to the last stitch. In that one, we do an increase, or 2 single crochet in 1 stitch. And then in the very last stitch, we do another increase, or 2 single crochets in that very last stitch. And then because this is a 2 increase row, I put my marker in so that I have to come back. I can see which row I just done. I put it in the next to the last one, bring it back up through the very last one. So the marker's actually showing the last 2 stitches of the row of the segment, which lets me know that this was a 2 increase row. And I'm going to do that in each segment as I go around. So there's the first one of round 5. Maybe round 6, actually, I think we're doing. This is round 6. And we know we're going to put 2 increases because the row before from the marker only had 1. So now we're in that next to the last stitch. So we know we can increase in that one. And we're going to do an increase in the last one. And we're going to move our marker up. And because we did 2, we're going to put it through 2 stitches. That was 2 increases. And now we're ready for the last segment of round 6. And again, we know that's the last segment of the round because we've marked the end of that with this green or a different color. So every time you get to the different color marker, that means you've finished that round and you're ready to start the next one. So I'm in the next to the last stitch. I'm going to do 2. And in the very last stitch, I'm going to do 2. And now I'm going to move my marker up. And that pattern actually just repeats over and over again. You either do a 2 increase row or a 1 increase row, alternating until you get your piece the size that you want it to be. So this is ready. I finished a 2 increase row. I'm actually on, I believe, row 7. So we're going to do another row with just 1 increase per segment, which means we're going to single crochet in each one until we get to the very last stitch, which, remember, my marker's in 2 stitches, so I'm going to do just 1 in the first side, but in the very last side of the where the marker is, I'm going to put 2. And then I'm going to move my marker up. And because it was a single increase row, I'm just going to put it in 1 stitch, the very top of that last stitch that I've just done. So here's my loop, and here's the very last stitch, and the marker's just in that very last stitch. I just need to make my loop smaller, and I can keep going for this row. Okay, we know by the placement of the marker what we're going to do. It was a 2 increase row before, so now it's a 1. So in the first side, we just place 1 stitch. And in the other end where the marker is, the last stitch of the row, we place 2. And then we move our marker up. And we'll do the last segment of this round. Doing 1 increase in the very last stitch of the row or round and marking it.